what you're going to hear from me are the standards that Caveon applies if we go out to an organization and do 15 different areas of our security audit, and one of them is conducting security investigations. So think of these as generic. These are intended to apply to any type of agency that gives tests. So, and there's an overall statement, and there are a number of specific standards. So the overall statement is that there are a set of procedures covering these three areas. Do you need to do a security investigation? Did you find anything fraudulent? And then how should you go about doing it? Next slide. So we, in all of the areas that we audit, we look to see that there's a clear definition of responsibility. And we mean by that more than somebody knows they're supposed to do it. It's written into their job description. Everybody else knows. Often we look for some kind of a chart saying who has what responsibilities. Second of our standards is that you don't try them out in the real world. You pilot them before you use them operationally. Good rule for almost anything. I think especially important with security investigations where there's potentially a lot riding on the outcome. Next slide. A lot of folks could be impacted by what happens when you do security investigations. So our audit looks at were all of those folks consulted in the process. The test program managers would usually get a shot at it. The measurement staff will probably be the next most likely, but often the communication staff are not talked to in enough detail that they know something is coming for which they need to prepare. The last thing you want to happen is to find out that you have a real problem through the press. And we have dealt with situations where that's the way the word got through a particular department because the press ran something about it. And then finally, legal review. And Dan Manis will touch on that quite a bit. Funding for any important job. Have you allocated the money in advance instead of scrambling at the last minute when you're facing a breach or a potential breach to see where those monies are going to come from and possibly shorting other important areas toward running a program. Next slide. We are keen on, I guess would be one way of describing it, if a lot of folks are going to be involved in the investigations. It's not being run out of the central office. It's not being run by an outside agency, but a bunch of different individuals are doing the investigations, as often happens with state assessments. First line of defense in the state is to go out to the districts. We recommend the development of a fairly formal investigations kit so that the same things will be done in all the places where an investigation is carried out. Next slide. So, Don, did you describe how to do these polls?
No, because when the poll comes up, I didn't realize we had a poll coming up here, but we've got a poll. And if we could have everybody go ahead and answer the poll, which is, does your organization have an investigation kit that is used when testing irregularities are investigated? Just give a background to do that. So we'll go ahead and then Skylar will show us the results. Skylar, generally once there's about 80% or so, you'll see a percentage on there, then you can show the results. Oh, there's the results.
Right. So about 20% of the folks online do have one, and 80% do not. So room for improvement if you're in a situation where it would be beneficial to have one. Not quite so important when you're doing it yourself. So what's in that investigations kit if you followed our advice? Procedures to be followed, the kind of records to be kept and how they're to be kept, and the laws and regulations that you're going to need to follow, which could actually undermine an entire investigation if you haven't followed all the rules. And 2 primary rules are the privacy of those involved in the test takers and administrators, and the confidentiality of test materials. Next slide. Along with an investigations kit, depending on how you look at it, you can think of it as part of it, training materials developed and available to those who are going to be doing investigations. In some cases, investigations turn out to be quite large. You want to make sure everybody knows exactly what they're supposed to do. And if you do that, then the next standard of applying the results consistently is likely to be adhered to. Next. And if all of these things that we've described take place, then you should end up with conclusions based on solid data and information, including statistical evidence, and that's where you want to be. I sometimes think of it as like we're the establishment and we're being attacked by guerrillas. We have to win every battle when we're trying to protect our programs. We can't afford to have situations even where we win 90% of the time. We have to win 100% of the time in order to maintain the credibility of our programs. So you need very solid results. Ready to move on then? So our next, oh, I should stop. Do we have any questions, Don, that have been posed?
Nope, at this time, John, there are no questions, so we can move on.
And while I was fooling around trying to get my computer to work, and if you know me, that's not unusual, I got to miss some of the start of things. So let's move on to John Olson.
Thank you, John, and everybody else. Good afternoon from Boston, Massachusetts. Although everybody, if you're not in the Eastern time zone, I guess I should be saying good morning to you for those west of here, which is pretty much most of the country. My presentation today is based on practical application of the standards that John Freemer just went over with you, which was sort of set the tone of what's appropriate and proper and professional to do a test security investigation. I'm basing my talk on actually my practical experience of doing several test investigations for Caveon. So the next slide, the overview of my presentation. In my talk today, I want to go over 4 steps, which include planning for the investigation and communications with key people who are helping organize it, preparing for the investigation, conducting it, and then summarizing the information, writing up a report from the investigation, and then some lessons learned from my perspective of doing these things. All right, step 1. Next slide. My perspective is from working with state departments of education that have decided that a security investigation needs to be conducted of districts and or schools in their state. So the very first step, of course, is organizing and communicating with your client, and like I said, in this case, a state. Typically, I have not seen investigations kits in existence, so usually we need to run through a lot of different steps to make sure the investigation gets carried out correctly. So one of the first steps is to go over responsibilities, and that's not just the investigator responsibilities, but the responsibilities of the state, possibly the district, and others who are involved. A key thing is to have a good contact person from the client, a state person that would help coordinate activities and also help do communications. Usually, the state will have a list of who they want to be interviewed. It could be district level people, it could be school, test administrators, teachers, and others. It could be even some state people, but you have to work on identifying who it is that is going to be interviewed and then setting everything up and scheduling these things. Usually the timeline is somewhat condensed, so the interviews need to be conducted typically in a fairly short time span over several days. Another very important thing is to go to obtain materials from the state and district related to the testing program and the procedures used. And that could include test administration manuals, materials for training staff on test security and test administration, various other documents, including anything on policies concerning maintaining security of the test. And then other logistics basically are setting up the timing and arrangements for actually conducting the interview. Step 2. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, preparing for the security investigation, and this would be from a person like me that would be conducting it. First thing you do is review all the materials from the state and or district in advance. Make sure you really have a good understanding of what the testing program is about. Typically, there will also be test data to take a look at. Could be data forensics analyses, things like erasure analysis, looking at score gains, similarity analysis, whatever whatever that's available that you can look at. And usually this information has already been looked at by people in the State Department of Education, but the investigator should be very aware of things too, and especially the statistics for flagging schools and classrooms and teachers. Another step in preparing for the investigation is to develop a detailed protocol with a series of questions that will be asked to the school administrators. This is an important piece. We've drafted ones before, and a lot of times there's a standard set of questions, but there may be additional questions that the state or district may want to have asked of the administrators. Once this protocol is put together, it needs to be reviewed and approved by the state or district. Next slide, please. On this slide, there's some sample questions that have been used before, and they're the standard ones focus on test security training, the who, what, how it was done, focus on test materials, how they're taken care of as they're being delivered to the testing site, who is responsible for them, what sort of security procedures are involved with the secure tests and other things, the preparations for the test administration, the actual administration itself. There's a series of questions that are asked on what happened on the day of testing, as well as possible makeup tests and how those are conducted. And then the post-test processes of preparing everything for return back to the test vendor. So all these questions are asked and a lot of times probed further with during the interviews. A very key thing, as you see on the last question there, is did you observe any irregularities? Obviously, that is one of the key things when you're looking at test investigations are, did irregularities happen before, during, or after test day? So anyway, these are just some examples of some of the interview questions. Okay, next slide, please. In step 3, so you've got your protocol and your set of questions. You've got the interviews all set up. One other step, which is a preparation step, is to train interviewers, make sure that everybody is on the same page, because usually it's more than one interviewer that's conducting these things, and then you actually conduct the interviews in the schools or at a central site. That depends on what the client wants. Typically, I've gone right into the schools and met with the administration staff for the school, and then get set up in a private room and then actually conduct the interviews, typically one-on-one. During those interviews, you must set a professional tone for conducting them. Sometimes people aren't quite sure what's going on, but you need to explain and just work your way through the questions and make sure that the responses provided by the interviewee are captured fully and precisely. And sometimes you may have to do follow-ups to clarify things. It might be during the interview or it might be shortly thereafter, just to make sure that you have the correct information. A very important thing throughout this whole process is that the interviewer, the investigator, must maintain confidentiality of the information that's been shared and must keep everything secure. All right, next slide. All right, then in step 4, so you've collected all the information, finished all the interviews, did the follow-ups. You analyze and summarize all the responses from everybody that was interviewed. Make sure that it's complete and very clear, and write up a draft report from the investigation. The report has to be based in evidence. Basically, the report is basically a summarization of the information that was gathered and the facts that were presented to you, and then written up across all the different people that were interviewed. Before the report, the draft report, is handed off to a client, though, I suggest very strongly internal reviews are done by experts in the security arena, by possibly legal people or others, to look at the content and make sure certain things maybe that shouldn't be in there are reviewed and identified. The report goes to the client for review, like I've been saying all along, a State Department of Education person or team, and they take a look, and then usually there's some questions coming back and revisions are needed. During this process, it's important to remember that the report may become a public document, either because of Freedom of Information Act or other requests. And when I say public, because it's usually these investigations I've been involved in are public education systems, so there will be some people who want to find out more what happened during the investigation. When everything is okay, you submit the final report then. All right, next slide, which should focus on some of the lessons learned from conducting investigations. Number 1, for sure, be prepared. That means, again, going back to the materials from the state and the district on the testing program. Read them all, understand them, also understand what has triggered the investigation and what other things may need to be examined carefully. When you actually go in and conduct interviews with school administrators, my belief is you should always approach it with the everybody is innocent until or unless proven guilty approach. Sorry, my screen went blank for a second. Need to be firm in questioning, though, and there's a series of questions. Information needs to be collected on all of those questions in the interview protocol, and things need to be probed when needed. A very key thing of the lesson learned is that you need to know the lay of the land and watch out for landmines. And what I mean by that is there may be politics involved in what's going on in the schools, districts, inside the state. There may be other players involved, and it could include anything from union representatives to attorneys to the press. Concerning the press, Since investigations and testing irregularities seem to be a popular topic for reporters to cover, you just need to be wary that you may be getting questions, and you have to have a plan on if questions come from the press, who do they get referred to. Typically, it would be a contact person, a key person at the state level or district. But it's better to have your plan made ahead of time instead of at the last minute. And I believe that's it. So here's a question. Don or Skylar, do I go back to you?
Yeah, this is Don Swanson again. Just because we had some technical issues at the beginning of the webinar, I just wanted to remind everybody on the GoToWebinar control panel that shows up on the right of the screen, there is an area for questions, and you can type in questions there, and because we've got some technical issues, we haven't put any questions. But the other item I wanted to remind everybody of is we will have the entire slideshow available tomorrow on the Caveon website in a PDF format. And all of you who are attending the webinar, you'll receive an email directly from GoToWebinar, and it will have a link to where you can view the entire slideshow. And you'll also have a link to sign up for our next webinar. But just so you know, because a lot of times people wonder about note taking and all that, everything that you're seeing in the sites will be available there. So let's see. I'm going to, okay, there it is. Wow, screen went away and I'll come back, but I'm going to turn the time over to Ben. And Skylar, if Ben's on mute, you might have to unmute him, because I think he's muted right now. Oh, there he is. Okay, then you should be fine now.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Probably should hear you.
Practicing a little censorship going on here. Right. My name is Ben Manis. Greetings from beautiful sunny Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm the Director of Test Security for the American Board of Internal Medicine, and I'm going to talk to you about investigating intellectual property theft. So in our case, this is test questions, and we're going to talk about the nuts and bolts of the actual investigative process. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about detection. Where would you find possibly infringing materials, things that make you want to engage in an investigation? Widely popular would be the internet, where you'd have chat rooms, which include brain dump websites. Some of them are as rudimentary as a simple message board of people who may be in a community that's studying for a particular high-stakes exam, and some may be big fee-for-service test prep companies. Also, things that you might want to know is Craigslist, eBay, Amazon. There are published or maybe published works out there that contain your intellectual property. It's very easy for someone to run a self-published study guide and just sell it online, as it would be to have an intricate website. So you may need to actually put search terms into search engines or have a search provider search various keywords about your exams, not just the formal names of them, but what they may be called in abbreviated states, what your students or stakeholders may be calling them, so that you could find these published works and start looking through them. It's important to have ways to field complaints if you don't already have them, to include tip lines, hotlines, anonymous email systems, possibly message links off your website that give people an open door to report suspicious activity to you. It's also important when you do that, that, instead of saying anonymous, say confidential. To the average person, it means the same thing, but the difference between anonymous and confidential from the investigator standpoint is great, because when a tip is strictly anonymous, it gives you very little to follow up on. Think about private tutoring as well. This isn't necessarily a private investigator, although if you don't have your own investigative staff or some type of field associate like a board member or stakeholder that could go on your behalf, you'll actually want to send people to the courses So let's say they're having a big test prep course in a certain area that you suspect is brain dumping, that they're skimming questions off of this for memorization. You're going to want to send your person to obtain the materials so that you can analyze them and match them to your item bank. And you're also going to want to see what they're saying. Sometimes something as innocuous as a marketing, claim can be, very damning. So if someone's saying, we have the newest and best test questions straight from the exam, that's maybe something you should look at. A lot of times, you're not going to be able to get that stuff online, so you're going to want to actually send someone to the class. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. There we go. How cases begin. All right, so we talked about the internet searches. Not only are you going to detect possible infringing material off the internet, but you're going to start your preliminary investigation online. We don't want to just know that this may look bad and then call legal. You're going to want to do your own due diligence. So try to find candidates, work through your own candidate bank, work through, Surveillance or Caveon Web Patrol, LexisNexis, if you get addresses and connections between people. All test fraud, all cheating is at one point or the other linked to some type of collusion. So you're going to want to be able to prove the link between the candidates who are colluding to further your investigation. Now, this may be done by setting up a fictitious profile. A lot of people come to me and say, can we do this? Is this legal? And the truth of the matter is, it absolutely is, because you're purchasing something publicly offered. What name you're purchasing it under is not, their concern, because when it comes down to it, you're obtaining it in a court of law isn't the concern. It's them having it and selling it that is. We've used that, and it's held up in court. So, go ahead and do that if you need be, because when you're enrolling someone in a course, be aware that the adversary, the person hosting this course, may indeed be searching through Google themselves. And if the first thing they see when that name comes up is that they work at Caveon or they work at your testing organization, well, they're either going to not allow you into the course or they're going to, clam up fast and you won't be able to get what you were trying to get. Think about data forensics and scoring. I don't really need to repeat what was just previously said, but a lot of your good leads that will initiate your test security investigation will come from things like a robust psychometrics program and data forensics. If you're applying them properly, you'll already have some of the connections that you may believe the collusion lies straight through the aberrance report. And then when you start drilling that down, you not only could be able to start a test security investigation, but you very well may be able to exonerate people. Because, in our particular testing world, if people are in the same geographic region or they study together or they practice together, at times the answers tend to bleed together, whereas it wouldn't be cheating, it's just practice that's similar in a particular environment. Things that come through the tip line, remember the who, what, where, when, why, and how. An incomplete lead leads to an incomplete investigation. So you're going to want to get as much information as humanly possible and then leave it open for a possible follow-up. Sometimes you may need to get back to that person 3 or 4 times, so it's in your best interest to convince them that whatever they say is confidential and protected by your organization, and that should be your policy, and that they should be at ease that their cooperation won't be broadcast to their employment community. Eligibility and registration. You'd be surprised what you already have merely in the roles of your records. So if people are sharing the same addresses when they enroll, if they're in the same educational environments or training programs, sometimes that leads to the actual root of the case. So where you may think it's just a couple of people cheating, well, it may be some type of organized effort involved in their training communities. You're going to want to complete your investigation by taking that step further, or at least bring it to the appropriate stakeholders for their attention. And then look at outside entities. Vendors, licensing authorities, schools, societies, associations, government entities. If you're looking at someone for possibly inappropriate activity, chances are you may not be the only one. Of course, it varies in what programs. In K through 12, you're really the first person to see them. But in a high-stakes certification like we have 3 prerequisite exams, state licensing boards, and training programs that all, precede people sitting for our test. So that gives us good places to look for patterns and leads before we complete our investigation. Next slide, please. So once you've started your preliminary investigation, now you have to start looking at your suspect identification and selection. Specifically, knowing precisely who you're dealing with. People who post test questions online do not normally do it with their complete legal name. So if you're seeing, screen names, acronyms, if you're seeing 2 names of the same, it's in your best interest to drill that down and get a definitive answer on a person. In a case that we had at one point, we had a spreadsheet of several hundred people that may have been involved, and there were some very common names. So which one of the 25 in our database is the one in question? So it's very important to use your investigative software, web searches, database searches, etc., to drill this down. By the way, guys, it doesn't always have to be some super secret database that the government maintains, which is what everyone thinks I work with. A lot of times I'm working with things like LinkedIn and Facebook, because you'd be surprised what people voluntarily put on the web these days. Look at financials. This is important. So if you're looking at someone who may or may not be stealing from your intellectual property base, you're going to want to do your due diligence to see if they're worth suing or if there's an alternative pathway to remedy the situation. Legal action is extremely expensive, and we are not yet where we need to be with the Department of Justice to get criminal attention on this stuff. So what you're going to want to do is do your best financial investigation, see what this person's standing in the community is, see what this person has to lose or gain from mixing. What happened? Don, you want to bring that back up?
Yeah, it's got to be. Now we're. Yeah, it's got screening. Even if we see the double, it's better than.
All right, if everyone can see this, we'll just keep pushing through. Oh, that's great.
That went out again. Hello, everybody. We're having quite a few technical issues today. It's usually, Scott, if you can just try to get back to that one screen again, single slide there. I think GoToMeeting, I'm going to blame it on GoToMeeting. Some new downloads and technical stuff. Okay, we're back there then.
Okay. Who is this person associated with? Are there possible other people that are helping this person? Remember an important fact about brain dumping. Brain dumping is memorization that is given or sold unlawfully to a person who's distributing it. The brain dumper is who we as test security investigators usually see, because they're offering your questions out. The bigger question is who's providing them to them. Now, once in a great while, you'll have a person who just takes the test a lot on their own and memorizes enough to put out there. But chances are they have a lot of associates, and it's important for you to get the word out in that community that that's not acceptable by going after at least as many of the high-level associates as you can. This is your choice completely as an organization. But, where one falls, another rises. So you're going to want to create an interruption in demand, and that means you're going to have to create a sense of responsibility in the community that may be enabling these brain dumpers. Severity of the case. Does this warrant legal action, or is other action legally defensible, like a score invalidation, like a restriction from future testing, like a reporting to a licensing body or some other, an educational institution if you're education. Think about that before you move into litigious areas that would, almost ensure you're defending yourself in a court of law. Next slide, please. So once you got all that pathway, then you're going to have to gather your evidence. So first, obtain as many copies of the infringing materials as you can. That means if you've been to one course that the Brain Dumper is offering, or you have brought everything off of one link, and there has been proven materials of yours in that body of work, then you're going to want to go to his next course. If he offers a different one for any other type of training that's under your program's purview, you're going to want to get it all, because the old adage is, if you don't know what's out there, how could you know that your test has integrity? So get as much as you can. Either engage in a proxy service or attend in person. That way you get the statements. Get a web history and screen cap of everything that they may be doing online, not just talking about your exams, but sales, links, whois information from whois.com, and the Wayback Machine. If anyone uses that, write it down. The Wayback Machine gives you a history of the website, hopefully for as long as it's been on that server. You're going to want to conduct interviews. This is tricky because if you don't know how to conduct a professional interview, you're going to want to bring someone in who possibly does. Why? It's a whole lot different than a regular, like a job interview or something, procedural. Reason? When someone's lying to you, you need to identify discrepancies in someone's story, and you need to be able to lock that person into that story and turn it back on. Otherwise, they're lying to you and you're accepting the lie. This happens, unfortunately, more than we would like to accept. Identify any co-conspirators, what we said in the last slide. Apply for and execute any warrant or seizure order. This is an extremely extraordinary method in court. Now, obviously, a warrant will be done by a public entity. If you're, working for education and a school district recommends something to the inspector general or the county prosecutor. But in this case, if it's just a private organization, you may apply for what's called an ex parte seizure order, which is like a civil search warrant. It's expensive, and it's done in court, and you have to show a great deal of evidence that the person is infringing on your intellectual property, and you also have to show evidence that if you don't provide this ex parte seizure order, that the evidence will be destructed, and it can't be brought into court. Otherwise, they're going to want, what happened? Otherwise, they're going to want to, have it come through the discovery process. And any of analysis of evidence. Now, not just with legal counsel, but another good question that we don't have a poll question up for. Ask yourself what your process is for comparing items from your item bank with suspected infringed documents you find online. If you don't have a way to get a definitive side-by-side comparison of these to a judge, you might want to think about that. Various software, what have you, because manually it's an extremely, extremely long process, and that does take its toll on your staff. Next slide, go ahead. Steps of a successful investigation. So once you identify that someone's distributing your content, your organization's willing to go to court, remember, you have to have buy-in from senior executives. Investigate thoroughly. Download copies of the infringed content and match it to your content. Distinguish that they're an exact match or that they're substantially similar. Folks, we're not talking about content areas. If you publish some type of exam blueprint or you tell people what to study, they're not going to be able to defend that in court if they're just giving you straight knowledge. So I work in medicine, right? If we put up a simple formula or a simple diagnosis that's common and that's copied, then it's very hard to prove copyright infringement. However, if people steal the creative characteristics written into the stems of your questions, the scenarios, the descriptors of the people involved, things like that, then you have a better chance of proving copyright infringement in court. If the material's in a chat room, try to gain background information on the participants, which is not always easy because they use aliases. Search your database for the emails that they provide in registration for the site. So they may say they're Mr. Mr. Johnny 125 on the chat board, but they're registering with a regular email. You put that in your database, you'll be surprised how many people use the same email for everything. Keep copies of all posts made by the individuals. This is evidence. Next. Then it's time to take action. Like we said, there's administrative ones, like invalidating scores, suspension, revocation of the certificate you issue, restriction from future testing eligibility, and notifications to your outside stakeholders. If that does not do the trick, then it's time to think legally. So it's civil litigation, either public or ex parte. If you're going after like a publishing company or an established person, then the public process is going to be a little less expensive than the ex parte process. If at all possible, I recommend notification to law enforcement agencies. They may not pursue it, but you've done your due diligence in getting it notified. And that goes also for the referrals to prosecutors or attorney generals. Some take them, some don't. Just depends on your program. Next slide. Since legal action may be more costly, there's a few administrative actions. We talked about this. Just keep an eye on one thing. If you have a professional base in high-stakes testing, or the parents of the people in your schools tend to be litigious, they might sue you even though you kept it administrative instead of legal. So whatever you do has to be well-documented, professional, and very, very transparent in court. Next. Next slide. When you do prepare for court, take the necessary steps to make sure you're ready. Ensure you have clearly presented your evidence. Unfortunately, juries and judges do not quite understand the intricacies of the testing organization, so you have to make that very clear to them in a layman's terms. Side-by-side slides are extremely easy for the court to read. Screenshots of the sites, materials that were present on the internet. If someone's advertising it, it makes it very, very easy to justify why you're in court. Video of any collusion that may take place at a test center. If you're using computer-based testing, this is very easy to obtain. Secure copyright documents for all infringed work. So make sure your copyright certificates are all there. If you do not copyright your material right now, because there's always a few people when I do these at conferences that don't, please start doing that. There are measures you could take to get this done by the U.S. Copyright Office. And if you have any cease and desist letters, send them first, unless you believe that evidence will be disposed of, because if it is, you may want to go the ex parte route. But if you've sent them, provide copies of all that correspondence to your legal counsel, because it shows that you did make an effort to reach out to these people before you had to take them to court. That always goes a long way in court. Next, please. Like I said before, you may be sued by people you investigate or threaten with legal action, so please be prepared. Have a clear, fair, and firm public adjudications process in place before the action is taken. This is a lot like what John said before, having an investigations kit, not just for your investigations, but for what you intend to do once the investigation's been conducted. Will sanctions need to be monitored? I.e., will there have to be some kind of process in place, like a professionalism package, for people to perform and then come back to you to prove that they are indeed not holding any more of your copyrighted material and that they won't do it again? Is there any kind of appellate process in place? Due process is important even if you're private sector. We're nonprofit over here, but we do have due process. You have a couple of different layers to go through, committees that will review your cases if you choose to appeal them. And then, is there a mechanism for investigative cooperation? This couldn't be any more important. Folks, if people, by whatever policies and procedures you've set in place to sit for your exams, do not have an agreement in place to where they have to cooperate with an investigation into irregularities, then they could just say, I don't want to talk to you, and slam the door in your face. How are you going to have it held up in court if they don't. So have an agreement in place before they take your test. Is this process managed internally or externally, i.e. contractor or vendor versus in-house? If so, you're going to need vendor agreements in place. And at what point does your board get involved? If you do have a board, whether it be a school board or a board of directors. If you're involving them too much, you tend to get burnout. So I suggest having a very clear chain of command within your organization before anything at the appellate level or at the very top gets referred to them. That way, they're not feeling constantly bombarded by you. Next. So lessons learned. Was a security breach due to possible vulnerability in your policies or your infrastructure identified during an incident? Think about that. Is there anything you could change to prevent this happening again? Investigative work and security work go hand in hand. So remember, everything is a lesson learned. If so, what could be done to change your policies, procedures, or technologies to fix it? Was a cost-benefit analysis done to address vulnerabilities identified in whatever incident you're looking at? And are there other ramifications to the organization from the incident, such as reputation, media influence, things like that? Next. Only have about 5 minutes, so any questions?
Yeah, I think we've had some issues with the questions and stuff, and we'd like to ask you, we're going to be sending out an email tomorrow that gives you the link to the slideshow, and so we will allow you to respond with any questions at that time. We really want to thank John and Ben for their presentations today. I think all the attendees would agree that there's a lot of really valuable information, and this is going to be a slideshow that you're going to want to download PDF tomorrow and review again. So it'll help you out in so many areas of your testing program. We'd like to thank again everybody. If you do have specific questions outside ones for the presenters, you can go to the LinkedIn forum, the Caveon LinkedIn forum on Caveon, and then again, look for us at ATP. We will also be an email that goes out tomorrow. We'll talk about next month's webinar, which is going to be talking specifically about something that Ben just talked about, but in more depth, Caveon's web patrol, and again, how it's has stolen and distributed on the web, and a lot more details about how things are down the web. So again, a big thank you to all of our presenters, and thank you for everybody attending, and we look forward to talking with you again next month. Thank you very much.